Welcome back to the channel, guys. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the break-in period, why it's so important, why you have to do some of the things you have to do, and what you have to do with the WRX platform, specifically the VV WRXs. It's actually going to be a super interesting video. It sounds very benign, but we're going to go over everything you need to know. And I have to apologize up front. The reason why there isn't an overload of VB content, it may sound stupid, and you're going to notice it already with this video. My microphone system broke, and I'm waiting for a replacement, and so I'm having to slow down the output right now, and you're dealing with semi-okay audio that I'm trying to engineer as much as possible, so it doesn't sound awful, but we are going to ramp up very soon. First VB parts are coming in, so this thing is going to get modified. And if you're wondering what I'm driving, I'm going to roll the intro right now. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that intro. So if you have a brand new 2022, or at this point 2023 WRX, because that is possible, and this can be applied to any car essentially, but what's really important here is understanding why you need to break in your car. And I know a ton of you guys have asked me, do I really need to do it? Is it really required? And all of those things. Well, the short answer is yes. So when a car is assembled, because you don't want someone driving it or using it, and you don't want to start too much wear and tear, nor do you want to distribute things like fluids through the vehicle prior to shipping, because you don't want them sitting in certain places in an environment that is so stagnant like a shipping container. These cars, for the most part, truly haven't been driven prior to delivery. And when you get it, for the most part, they're driven a short test drive to make sure there's no fully mechanical issues with driving the car. They're driven around the facility for movement. They're driven onto the ship. They're driven off the ship, and they are then transported to wherever they go. They're driven off the truck. Usually dealers then drive them to go get gas, for the most part, because these cars are basically shipped with almost no fuel. There's a little bit added so that they can move on and off, but very little fuel is added during that process. You might say that sounds crazy, because like, how do you make sure a car works when it's after it's assembled? Because it is truly just assembled. Well, the reality is they can't tamper with the odometer. So the miles that you're buying it with are the true miles of the vehicle. But with that comes all the things that can come with having a car and receiving a car that quite literally has just been assembled. It hasn't gone through any break-in periods. And if you're not familiar, when parts are made and you make things in a manufacturing process, I mean, to the most rudimentary piece of it, things have coatings on them, they have oils on them, they have things that aren't necessarily cleaned off, because they don't necessarily have to be prior to assembly, but they're really important that you burn them off, or they are worn off in a normal factor. So that's one piece. I mean, that's not super significant. The more significant piece is you have a lot of components in a vehicle that have to do with interaction, whether it is physical interaction like your brake pads or your clutch, or it's like fluid interaction or air interaction like oil being distributed, or a wear pattern on a direct injection engine leaving carbon on the sides of your throttle body or intake valve or whatever it's going to be. So the latter of what I just said is less important, but like, let's break it down to the first things. Let's talk about braking, because that's an easy tangible. The reality of breaking your car in and braking is less important. Your brakes break in very quickly. It's like when you change your brakes or you change your pads and rotors, you need to reseat them, and you need to make sure there's not an uneven wear pattern. So that happens relatively quickly. Where you get a little bit more nuanced and something that takes a little bit longer is your transmission and your clutch. It actually takes some time to break in your clutch. Just like you would have to if you were replacing your clutch, you have to go through a procedure. It's all about wear and material loss and finding the perfect fitment, because a clutch quite literally makes mechanical contact with another piece. So they want to make sure that there's even wear, but because wear isn't even between gears or first touch point or where it initially makes its friction bond, you need to have enough of it that it evens out and becomes a good bonding material and a uniform bond. But what happens is when you shift and you do things like hard braking, when you're thinking about materials, they're trying to have you drive in a way where you're not creating these impact points and you're not disrupting the normal bonding process. So that's your second step, and that is part of the break-in period, but doesn't have the full cycle of the break-in period. The more important part of the break-in period, which is the engine aspect and driving performance of the engine, comes across as two things, and this is why it's super critical. So they say this blanket break-in period, but it's really to make sure that multiple aspects of your vehicle are kind of falling in together. So the bigger portion is your driving system, the thing that creates power in your car and then distributes power across to your wheels. Well, what ends up being critical is having good data first collected by the ECU so the engine can learn, because part of these cars are about learning, and then your car basically performs after learning. You need to start doing all the processes of like burning off the material that comes in the manufacturing process, but also heating and cooling the engine enough so your materials expand and contract enough to create the typical swelling of metal that happens around the engine. Sounds crazy, but we're talking about microns, very little, but things that are required. It gets the gaskets seated, it makes sure it gets fluid on them, oil is distributed evenly across the vehicle, and more importantly, your engine learns the bounds of your driving conditions, like your ambient conditions and things that it actually learns through the ECU. There are a lot of other mechanical factors that get into it, like temperature fluctuation, normalization, a lot of material science. So again, all of this sounds like, oh, you bring it up to temperature, you don't, then you reduce it, and everything is kumbaya. There's a lot of material science behind engine design. As we try to make engines lighter and more efficient, we use different types of materials, and those materials work different ways, and sometimes they need to be heat treated, and sometimes we put products in cars that need some driving to actually get going. So there's many different things you're doing here. But before we get too lost, there is a very real reason why you need to break in your engine. So, break-in period. What do you have to do with this car? But this can be a statement for any car. What you need to do is make sure for the first 500 to 1,000 miles, I think every manufacturer basically says 1,000 miles, but you need to make sure that you're not going hard on the gas. We're not looking for any spikes of, power. We want to avoid any impacts to both the engine, the brakes, the clutch, all the systems in the vehicle. So keep it under 4,000 RPM for the first 1,000 miles for sure. That's easy to do. That's simple. That's across the board, especially with forced induction vehicles when you're building boost. Doesn't make any sense to cause a spike when you don't exactly know how it's performing. We're kind of mitigating the risk of catastrophic failure. What's also important, especially in the first 200 or 300 miles of use, and this is pretty critical, is that you make sure you vary your driving conditions, right? You can burn through your break-in period on a highway, but you're really not burning through and giving the uniformity to your parts and to your vehicle. So what's really important is that you have varied driving conditions: highway, back roads, lots and turns, city driving, traffic. You want to create the most varied early existence for this car to break it in properly and give you the car the most exposure to what it could be doing, and that therefore actually creating the most level of safety for your vehicle. You also want to make sure, especially for your first couple hundred miles, that you're not maintaining one speed for too long. Now, if you're driving 50 miles home from the dealer, no sweat, right? It's not going to be the end of the world if you're driving home from the dealer and it takes an hour to get home and you're driving on the highway, even more. What you need to avoid is spending 6 hours doing a road trip at 60 miles an hour the whole way, because you're not giving your car or your clutch the variability in driving conditions. And that's essentially it. If you do those few things, you're good. Get to 1,000 miles, get your oil change, you're free and clear. Flush out all those imperfections that could be in there, probably nothing, but get your oil change and you're pretty much good to go at that point. Now, for some of you guys who want to think in extremes and they're like, I want to know that my car is going to blow up if I don't do that because that's the only reason I'm going to do it. The reality is it's probably not going to. These cars are designed with massive levels of factors of safety, and you're not going to probably have a tangible issue. Now, I say that from a numerical perspective. With any statement like that, there is a percentage of people where it will affect them. And that's got nothing to do other than chance in reality. If you don't break your car in, you up your odds of having a catastrophic event or something go wrong. That is a really reality statement. There is no guarantee that nothing will go wrong. I mean, if a manufacturer is saying you need to do this, it's something to listen to. There's a reason they're saying it. Follow your break-in period. I know it sucks. I'm just getting out of my break-in period. Haven't really been able to enjoy the car as much as I want in the last 1,000 miles. So it's been disappointing, but it's the reality of owning this vehicle and owning any new vehicle. It's just what you have to do. It's part of owning a new car. You should do it. It's not worth it to not do it, even with the slight amount of risks. If anything, it makes the anticipation of hitting 1,000 miles even more exciting. I'll see you guys in the next video.